During this video, we're going to show you how to take advantage of the global categories and the global rules as a part of Ledgersync's global rules engine. So let's go ahead and dive right in. To get started, we're going to come up to the top here and we're going to select on Rules Engine. This will pull up all the different functionality of the engine itself, and we're going to head over to our Global Rules tab. On this page, you'll notice we have three subcategories here basically to choose from. Our categories, our vendors, and our global rules. Starting off with our global categories. The purpose of this is understanding that from one company file to the next, you may not have a chart of accounts that's exactly the same for every single client. So we created the ability that you can create what we call a global category, in this scenario being our bank fees, add a description so other users understand what you're trying to do with that global category. And then for every client that you've connected or synced with QuickBooks Online, you can actually choose what account you want this to map back to. So this means if you're going to end up having maybe you've got, instead of bank charges, you have bank charges, sub-account, standard fees, or incidental fees, you can select and map out individually for each one of these clients exactly where you want it to go to. So here we've got one that says bank fees, other ones say bank charges, and then we also have one where nothing's been assigned at all. So if you're a firm where you have niched down and you have a very specific vendor list, chart of accounts, they're more likely going to be exactly the same for everything. But if you're more of a generalist, or maybe just have a couple niches that you work within, you can choose not to assign certain clients to certain rules so they won't be triggered when the transaction process is through. You'll see, of course, that it shows we've got one that's been unassigned and 4 that have been assigned. I draw attention to that because on our table of our global categories, you'll see the same information here. This is important to know because as you add more clients on, you want to map all of the different global categories for each of the new clients so that the global rules will automatically start to work for those transactions and start processing things for you right away. If you notice the transactions are not being picked up by the global rules, you're going to want to come back, check this table, and make sure that you've assigned every single client the appropriate thing. Another key component of using the global rules is going to be your global vendor list. And the purpose of this here is you may have different vendor names or a certain vendor that's spelled different ways within different company files. For example, we'll hit on this one to be able to edit and see it, but it's if you had AT&T, maybe in one setup you have ATT, another one you have AT space T, or you have AT&T. You can create these as aliases that basically all map right back up to that original AT&T as your global vendor name. You can easily add a new one on by clicking here, typing it in, and creating the different aliases there as well. If you need to remove one of these, it's very easy to do. You can come in and basically click on one of the X's, and it's going to ask you if you want to delete that specific vendor name. I'm going to hit cancel because I want to keep it now. Let's dive into the global rules and talk about how you work with these specifically. So by now, of course, clicking the global rules subtab here, you're going to see a list of any of the global rules that have already been created. In here, if you click into any of the rows, it's going to pull up all the information that basically creates that global rule. You're going to notice right away that our rule types have either inclusion or exclusion. This is something really important and very unique to Ledgersync. We recognize that if you are already using third-party applications, such as maybe ADP for payroll, and you're pulling the journal entries in, you're going to have certain transactions that are already pushed into the general ledger, and we don't want to necessarily create duplicate transactions. This is where you would end up using an exclusion rule. So you could create the normal details that would catch the rule itself and then set up as exclusion, and when you go and review everything, it'll automatically exclude those, eliminating a duplicate, which is really cool. Naming convention wise, my personal suggestion or my tip for this, we always do the naming towards the first two initials of the person creating the rule itself. Then it becomes a dot, becomes the account, the chart of account that you want the expense to be going to or the transaction to go to, dot, and then the payee name. We do this because it makes it easier searching wise after you have a whole bunch of different rules to find something unique. And primarily the first initials are, if you end up finding that certain rules aren't working well, you'll know who you should actually spend a little extra time doing some training with to get the most out of your rules, of course. Then from there, if you should be pretty familiar with how the rules kind of worked inside QuickBooks Align, it's very similar to the idea: choose your money in, your money out, your all or your any, your bank text capability versus amount. We don't offer the description as an option because truly the description never works well anyways. So we're using the bank text. You want to grab that piece of it to really be what triggers the rule. All versus any is a very common area where challenges will come into play. If you have a lot of rules and something's not triggering correct, that's definitely a piece you'd want to look at. So we've got contains, doesn't contain exactly. You can add additional conditions on. So if you want to do it by amount, equals, so forth, put the value in. So this is a great example. Let's say we said it was $100. If it's all, this is only going to grab Chevron transactions that are equals $100, would only grab that very finite amount. If it was any, it would actually can basically grab anything that said Chevron or anything that was $100. That's why this becomes super, super important in how you structure it. We'll take that off, of course. And then inside here, it's going to ask us to assign. This is asking us for one of our vendors. And this is the global vendor list is where this is coming from. We'll click on Chevron to assign that. For our expense, it's going to ask you for that global category. And we've got it set up as auto expense fuel, as we can see here. The last box here, this is specifically for the industry of the company based off the NICS code, so you can define what kind of an industry this is for. The purpose of this is bigger picture, understanding that while some people may have niched down their practice, others may still be more of a generalist, or you may have different teams that are working in different industries. Breaking it out this way, the goal is to crowdsource rules that work across certain industries to help people as you add on more and more clients. Once that's set up, you'll hit save. And it will then, of course, save that rule inside of here. Now, you may notice this when you first create it, may spin for a second because it's actually trying to go through and process and see what can it try to clear out or acknowledge right away. So if you create a new global rule, we've got a whole bunch of clients connected, you'll see a number where it starts to tell you hey, we just processed this many transactions. From the table, the priority number that you see here is the order in which the rules are have the priority. So which ones go first versus later on. So if you create a rule later down and it's not activating the way you would expect it to, try lifting it up higher in the priority list, and that may solve the problem for you. You do that just by clicking and grabbing and moving it up, basically. If you wish to edit or delete these, or I should say enable or delete this, click on the little box here, and you'll see that you can either disable a rule or delete the rule completely. You also have your filtering at the top here as to show what's only active ones or just inactive, as well as whether it's applied to money in or money out. And the filtering here is, again, bigger picture, looking down the road. When you start having even more rules, you can get through and look through the stuff a lot faster. Don't forget you have your ability to change the number of items per page shown here at the bottom also. Now, before we end this video, the key is when it comes to the global rule transactions, when I go to my big transaction table, I'll come into here and we will go applied rule so we can see it. You'll notice that we have both green bubbles and blue bubbles. Our green bubbles are all of our global rules. Our blue bubbles are client-based rules. Client rules will always override a global rule. Hopefully this quick video gave you a better idea of how the global vendor list and the global category list play a part of utilizing the global rules engine created by Ledgersync. Be sure to check out some of our other videos as we explain the different aspects of the rules engine, including the client rule list, our syncing transactions capability, and many other features built into Ledgersync itself.